This is Classic Rain Hamcast number 42, posted May 29th, 2021. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Janice Carson, AB2RA, has been a licensed ham since 1959. Today she's known for her restoration of older tube-type ham radio equipment and her involvement with the FCC. Janice was interviewed in February 2020 by Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, for his QSO Today podcast.
Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, your host. Janice Carson, AB2RA, has been an active ham since childhood and has an interest in the restoration and repair of older tube-type amateur rigs. Janice is a frequent contributor to Electric Radio magazine and does an amazing job documenting her projects on her wireless-girl.com website. AB2RA is also a politically active advocate for our amateur radio community to the FCC in Washington.
It was fourth grade, I think. I went over to a friend's house, and it turned out his dad was a ham. I just asked to look inside the room, and he kind of broke house rules. And I just stood in the doorway, and I was just impressed by the equipment and the world wall map. And there was a huge collection of QSL cards. Of course, I didn't know what they were then. Years later, my grandfather gave me a crystal set. Turned out it was broken as far as AM broadcast band reception, but it received shortwave well due to the self-resonance of the antenna. And I heard the BBC and HCJB, a religious broadcaster in South America. In the morning, Radio Australia came in. Then at one point, I heard K2IWR talking to some of his friends, and that call is today used by the Cortland repeater. He was an unintentional elder. I never met him. Using that broken crystal set, of course, he was running AM. It was before 59. 59 is when I got my novice license, which came about as a direct result of that. I had a regen set kit and one of the ubiquitous 6L6 rigs. I worked for the chemistry teacher and saved up for a Lafayette HE10, which is often mistaken for an S38, but it had an RF stage and two IFs and was a lot better radio. The antennas were really problematic. I had a lousy vertical on a 3-foot pipe, and I almost gave up the hobby.
You described that to me as a Gotham vertical. What made that a Gotham vertical?
Well, it was a brand name, and they advertised in a lot of the journals, Work DX and all of this stuff. They had no traps. There was just a loading coil at the bottom, and if you wanted to change bands, you had to go out, change the jump around the coil. And if you put them up in the air fairly high and put some radios on, they probably did work fairly well. Of course, I couldn't work anything but 80 and 40. There was a lot of television interference back in the day because TVs had 21 megacycle IFs. So I quickly learned to avoid that, and a vertical on 80 and 40 are not very good for close-in work either.
What was the hometown?
Ithaca, New York. I spent most of my life here. I was born in western New York, but my father had a job in the defense industry, and we moved every year. I've moved around a bit, but I chose to come back here. Actually, I was a Silicon Valley refugee around 1970. I lost my job due to a company buyout and a downturn in the employment. I decided to come back to New York State, just basically crowding, cost of rent, quality of life, and I've never regretted the decision. It's just been tough at times to find employment, but there's a couple of large universities here in Ithaca and lots of tech jobs.
Back to the Silicon Valley for just a second. My memory of the Silicon Valley in 1970, and I was young, but I remember going through it, it was like a lot of orange groves. There might have been Stanford University and Hewlett-Packard there, but it's nothing like it was now. Was that your memory as well?
Oh, yes, it was beautiful. When we first set up housekeeping, I had a house on South Francis Street, which was right in the center of Sunnyvale, Mountain View. Just a block away, I could walk into this huge apricot orchard, and they also had strawberry fields there, and the strawberries were wonderful. They were the size of a golf ball.
So people don't remember that the Silicon Valley, before it was the Silicon Valley, was the fruit basket of Northern California.
Actually, as a kid, I was in 5th grade, I think. I worked over the summer cutting apricots and removing the pits. It gave me enough money to buy a little Kodak box camera. I was interested in photography.
As a 14-year-old novice licensee, were you able to find a radio club in Ithaca or even a radio club at your high school in order to continue on being an active ham?
Yeah, the Mike and Keith Club in Ithaca. It's mostly older people, but there was a couple of us that went there, and they treated us pretty well. There was a similar club at the high school. For a couple of years, I was president of the club.
Did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
Definitely. There was a show on the local radio station, WHCU. It was called Accent on Youth, and National Cash Register, NCR, paid for a half-hour program. I was interested in that for a while. Of course, Sputnik was launched, and I saw it pass over and actually was able to receive it on one occasion. That kind of settled me on engineering and technology, and I won a scholarship, and I went to Cornell as a freshman. Then my father lost his job, and we moved to the West Coast quite precipitously. And I did some work at a TV repair shop and then went to work for a music store repairing guitar amps and electronic organs for a part-time job while I was going to school out in California. And that was great. Back then it was only $100 per semester, and we definitely need more of that today. If they can start even the first couple of years, their education at that point, affordably, learn they can succeed, and build an academic groundwork to proceed. It would be great if we could do something for American kids instead of giving college scholarships to foreign kids.
You're listening to a conversation with Janice Carson, AB2RA, conducted in February 2020 by the man behind the QSO Today podcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG. We'll hear more from our first excerpt from Eric's interview with Janice in a moment. This is Rain Classic Hamcast number 42. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Classic Rain from www.therainreport.com.
Don't you think we should start a lot earlier, like in elementary schools, with a STEM education or introductions to technology, physics, and electronics?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that was a highlight of President Trump's speech last night for me was that he advocated for vocational training in high school.
That was pretty common, though.
Yeah, back then it was, but these days it's not. For the most part, in New York State, that's been outsourced to an organization called BOCES, where they can share a teacher among school districts at a BOCES facility and bus their kids in to learn stuff like electric and building trades and whatnot that'll allow people that aren't college-bound. Actually, there was an electronic class there at one point that some of the kids earned credits at Tompkins Cortland Community College and went on to get a 2-year degree. But those organizations are hard to fund. The taxpayers are hard-pressed to come up with their own needs covered. So sadly, some of those programs have gone out of existence in recent times. I hope it changes. Ham radio is a great way because kids want to do something. They want to build something. They want a hands-on experience, not some theoretical, esoteric, abstract stuff with a lot of math.
Let's go back to your workbench. You're a contributor to Electric Radio Magazine. What kind of boat anchor equipment do you have, and why do you collect it?
Well, actually, I have always thought of the Viking II as one of the finest examples of good RF engineering. The audio section, not so much, but that can be fixed. There's probably going to be 6 months tracking my process through the restoration and improvement of the Viking II. I also did an article on a DX20, which is a bare-bones CW rig, and it's a good example of how many parts can you remove from a design and still have a transmitter that works. It's just fun to play with simpler, older equipment. I'm not limited to that. If electric radio will tolerate it, I plan to do an article on the Innovonics 223, which is an audio processing system which prevents splatter. Very effective in increasing the audio punch.
It's my understanding from your list of equipment that occupies your shack, you're not wed to a single operating mode. You actually seem to be able to operate all the different modes, all the way up to the latest digital modes with different kinds of gear. What kind of equipment do you have in your shack right now?
Of course, you can see the Viking 2, an HQ 180, a K7 DYY Class D, full legal limit AM rig. I had to build a tuner from scratch just to handle the power on that because many commercial tuners just are not able to handle it. My original Lafayette HE10 from my Nava station, I managed to buy that from an estate sale. The guy refused to sell it back to me. I have a DX20, an HQ129. For newer gear, I like the Ten-Tech Corsair 1. It's the original. The keying on CW is full break-in. Ham should demand a radio that doesn't have clunky standard relays in it. For FT8, I have an FT950, and for sideband, I have an Ameritron ALS 1300. I kind of wished I'd waited until they came out with a 1306, but the monitor scope is an old Yaesu YO301, but I really like it. It's a very capable scope. And, of course, a Signal Link Tigertronics interface box for FT8. I missed all of the PSK31 and some of those modes because I was just too busy surviving and being a single parent.
What makes you decide what mode you're going to operate on any given day?
I occasionally get involved in some of the lower-powered contests where a little pistol has a chance. I don't have a beam antenna. I just have wire antennas. There are some vintage gear contests that the Antique Wireless Association sponsors. I was the moderator of the AM event, and also the Rollins event, which features pre-1960 gear on CW. They just recently changed that to also include AM phone. But mostly it's just what moves me. I have a lot of friends on AM. I like to keep in touch with them, and I enjoy CW. Sometimes the bands are open and I want some FT8, and I've been doing some single sideband on 60 meters lately. The channels are programmed directly into the radio and you have to access it through the menu. You have to stay very carefully on channel. A 15 kilohertz band without any particular channels would be similar to the more traditional operation that people are used to. You find an open frequency and you call CQ, or you respond to somebody, or with FT8, there's roughly 2.5 kilohertz window of range of people that are operating all at the same time within that spectrum, and you just click on whatever station you want to talk to, you're off and running.
Is there a history in terms of the 60-meter band? Are there co-channel users in 60 meters, and that's the reason that it was channelized rather than open like all the other bands?
That's correct. Amateur radio is a secondary user, and government agencies need that, and if you hear somebody come on the channel and they tell you to get out of their way, you shut down quickly.
This concludes the first of two excerpts from a February 2020 interview of Janice Carson, AB2RA, by Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, founder of the QSO Today podcast. We'll hear more from Janice Carson next time. The Rain Classic Hamcast is produced by its founder and producer, Hap Holly, KC9RP. It's copyright 1985-2021 Rain. All rights are reserved. Rain's programming is made available under a Creative Commons license. Rain Classic Hamcast number 43 will post June 12, 2021 on therainreport.com. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, bidding you very 73, and don't forget to keep on hamming.